Picture this. You're 7 months pregnant, lying in bed at 2 in the morning, when your husband's phone buzzes with a text message that changes everything. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear the red dress. But that's not the worst part. The worst part comes 5 minutes later, when another message appears. The wife won't be a problem much longer. What would you do if you discovered your husband wasn't just cheating on you? What if you found out he'd hired professionals to make you disappear? What if the man you trusted with your life was planning to take that life away from you and your unborn child? This is the true story of Rebecca Thompson Collins, a 32-year-old marketing coordinator who thought her biggest problem was a cheating husband. She had no idea she was actually fighting for her life against a conspiracy that reached deeper than she ever imagined. In the next 90 minutes, you'll discover how a pregnant woman turned the tables on the people trying to destroy her, using nothing but her intelligence, her family's love, and evidence that would shock you to your core. This isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about survival, justice, and the lengths people will go to when someone threatens their child. Are you ready to find out how far a mother will go to protect her baby? Because what happens next will keep you listening until the very last word. This is the pregnancy threat. The phone buzzed against the nightstand like an angry wasp, its vibration echoing through the silence of Rebecca Thompson Collins's childhood bedroom. She rolled over carefully, 7 months pregnant, and feeling every ounce of the weight she carried. The digital clock on her mother's old dresser glowed 2:17 a.m. in angry red numbers that seemed to mock her inability to sleep. Rebecca had been lying awake for hours, staring at the same ceiling she'd contemplated during high school heartbreaks and college anxieties. But this was different. This wasn't teenage drama or academic stress. This was her marriage falling apart while she carried her husband's child, and the weight of that reality pressed down on her chest like a physical thing. The fight with Marcus earlier that evening had been their worst yet. Not screaming or throwing things, but the cold, careful kind of argument where every word was chosen to inflict maximum damage. He'd come home late again, claiming a client dinner that had run long, smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't hers. When she'd asked about it, he'd looked at her with the kind of condescending patience reserved for children and mental patients. "You're being paranoid, Rebecca. Pregnancy hormones are making you imagine things." The dismissal had cut deeper than anger would have. The implication that her concerns weren't valid, that her instincts couldn't be trusted, that her growing suspicions were just hormonal delusions. So she'd packed a bag and driven to her mother's house in Riverside Heights, leaving Marcus alone in their 2-story colonial with the unfinished nursery and the growing distance between them that seemed to expand every day. Now her phone was buzzing insistently, pulling her from the edge of sleep she'd finally found. Rebecca's hand found the device automatically. Muscle memory from months of interrupted sleep and pregnancy insomnia. But this wasn't the baby keeping her awake. This was something else entirely. The screen lit up her face in the darkness, casting harsh blue light across features that had grown rounder and softer with pregnancy. Marcus's name appeared at the top of a text message, but the words beneath it made her blood freeze in her veins. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Wear the red dress." Rebecca blinked at the words, certain she was misreading them. She read them again, then a third time, as if repetition might change their meaning. 7 months pregnant, her body swollen and awkward, her ankles thick with fluid retention, her back aching from carrying their child. And her husband was texting someone else about red dresses and seeing them tomorrow. Her hands began to shake as she took a screenshot, the phone trembling between her fingers. Then another screenshot and another, as if the digital evidence might disappear if she didn't capture it immediately. She opened Marcus's message thread and scrolled up with growing horror, finding weeks of conversations she'd never seen. "Miss you already, beautiful. Counting down the hours until I can hold you again. Rebecca's staying at her mother's tonight. We have the house to ourselves. Can't stop thinking about last night." Each message was a knife twist, each timestamp a moment when she'd believed they were working through their problems, planning for their baby, building a life together. The dates showed the conversation had been going on for weeks, maybe months, while she'd been growing their child and trying to save their marriage. Rebecca checked her phone compulsively. Lock, unlock, Read the messages again. Lock, unlock. Screenshot more evidence. Lock. The pregnancy had made her clumsy with everything, made her second-guess her own perceptions, made her doubt her instincts. She dropped the phone, and it clattered against her mother's hardwood floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet house. "Honey, you okay?" Patricia Thompson appeared in the doorway like a guardian angel, her silver hair catching the light from the hallway. At 58, Rebecca's mother had the instincts of a retired nurse and the intuition of a woman who'd raised 2 children through every crisis imaginable. She wore her blue bathrobe, the same one Rebecca remembered from countless midnight conversations about boys and dreams and disappointments that had seemed so important at the time. "Marcus is cheating on me." The words fell out of Rebecca's mouth like broken glass, sharp and cutting and impossible to take back. She heard them echo in the silence of her childhood bedroom, surrounded by faded photographs of high school friends and participation trophies from a time when her biggest worry was whether she'd make the volleyball team. Patricia moved into the room with the careful grace of someone who'd spent decades responding to medical emergencies, settling onto the bed and making the old mattress creak with familiar sounds. The weight of her presence was immediately comforting, solid and real in a way that made Rebecca feel less alone. "What did you find?" Rebecca handed over the phone with trembling fingers, watching her mother's face change as she read through the messages. Patricia's expression grew harder with each screenshot, her nurse's training allowing her to absorb information without emotional reaction, while her mother's heart processed the implications. "I'm not crazy," Rebecca whispered to herself, needing to hear the validation out loud. "I know what I'm seeing. This is real." "No, honey, you're not crazy." Patricia's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen enough marriages implode to recognize the warning signs. "I've suspected something was wrong for months, but I hoped I was just being an overprotective mother." Rebecca stared at the ceiling, the same white expanse she'd contemplated during teenage heartbreaks when the world seemed to end every few months. But this time felt different, final. There was a baby involved now, a life depending on her decisions, and the weight of that responsibility was almost overwhelming. Her hand moved instinctively to her belly, feeling the solid roundness of 7 months of pregnancy. "What do I want to do?" she asked, the question directed more to herself than to her mother. Before Patricia could answer, the phone buzzed again in her hands, the same unknown number that had been texting Marcus. Rebecca's heart hammered against her ribs as she read the new message, the words appearing on screen like a death sentence. "The wife won't be a problem much longer." The room went completely silent except for the sound of Rebecca's sharp intake of breath. Patricia leaned over to read the screen, and the color drained from her face as she processed the implications of what they were seeing. "Rebecca," she said slowly, her voice taking on the careful tone she'd used when delivering bad news to patients' families. "This isn't just an affair." The weight of those words settled over them like a heavy blanket. Rebecca felt the baby move inside her, as if sensing the change in her emotional state, and realized that whatever she'd thought she was dealing with had just become something much more dangerous. She looked at her mother, seeing her own fear reflected in Patricia's eyes, and understood that her marriage hadn't just ended tonight. Her life as she knew it had ended too, and whatever came next was going to require strength she wasn't sure she possessed. But as she felt the baby kick against her ribs, Rebecca knew she was going to have to find that strength anyway. Some things were worth fighting for even when you didn't know how to fight, especially then. Dawn came gray and unwelcoming through the kitchen windows of Patricia's house, casting everything in the kind of pale light that made even familiar things look foreign and uncertain. Rebecca sat at the round oak table where she'd eaten countless childhood breakfasts, cradling a cup of decaf coffee that had gone cold while she stared at her phone. She'd managed maybe an hour of sleep after the revelation about Marcus's affair, her mind spinning with questions and possibilities she didn't want to consider. The message about her not being a problem much longer had disappeared when she tried to screenshot it the second time, as if it had never existed. But Rebecca knew what she'd seen, and the memory of those words burned in her mind like a brand. "I need to go to the house," she told her mother over plates of scrambled eggs that neither of them was eating. Patricia looked up from her own untouched breakfast, concern etched in the lines around her eyes. "Maybe you should wait. Call Danny first." Get some support before you face whatever's waiting there. Rebecca's older brother Daniel worked private security for corporate clients, specializing in the kind of discreet investigations that wealthy people needed when they suspected their employees or business partners of betrayal. At 34, he'd made a career out of being protective, but Rebecca's pregnancy had amplified his instincts to an almost suffocating degree. "I can handle this myself," Rebecca said, though her voice lacked the conviction she was trying to project. "I need to see what else he's hiding." The drive to the house felt like traveling through a foreign country, even though she'd made the same trip thousands of times over the past 3 years of marriage. Everything looked different now, filtered through the lens of betrayal and the growing suspicion that Marcus's infidelity was just the surface of something deeper and more dangerous. She used her spare key to enter through the front door, grateful that Marcus had left for his supposed business trip to Atlanta the previous morning. The Colonial felt different in the early morning light, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the guilt and deception that had been festering within them. The air smelled stale, tinged with the remnants of cologne and something else she couldn't identify. Rebecca began her search systematically, the way her mother had taught her to approach any overwhelming problem. Break it down into manageable pieces, be thorough, document everything. 7 months pregnant made her slower and more deliberate, but it also made her more determined. She had to know the full scope of what she was dealing with. She started with Marcus's office, the mahogany-paneled room where he conducted his real estate development business and handled their personal finances. The space had always felt like his domain, somewhere she was welcome only by invitation, and now she understood why. In his desk drawer, hidden beneath insurance policies and tax documents, she found credit card statements that made her stomach turn. Expensive dinners at restaurants she'd never been to, on nights when Marcus had claimed to be working late. Hotel charges for rooms she'd never seen. Jewelry purchases from stores she'd never visited, for gifts she'd never received. The panic cleaning started without her conscious decision, a coping mechanism left over from childhood when controlling her environment was the only way to manage overwhelming emotions. Suddenly, she was 7 months pregnant and scrubbing baseboards at 6 in the morning, her knees aching and her back screaming because she couldn't control her husband's infidelity, but she could control whether the house was spotless. She cleaned with desperate efficiency, as if removing every speck of dust might somehow erase the evidence of Marcus's betrayal. The physical activity helped calm her racing thoughts, gave her time to process what she'd discovered, while her hands stayed busy with familiar tasks. Her phone rang, startling her from her cleaning frenzy. Danny's name appeared on the screen, and she answered with hands that still shook from adrenaline and cleaning supplies. "Mom told me what happened." Danny's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I'm coming over right now." "I'm fine," Rebecca lied, looking around at the evidence of her frantic cleaning session. "Becca, I'm coming over. Don't touch anything else until I get there." Daniel Thompson arrived within 20 minutes, his face grim and his movements purposeful. He carried coffee from Rebecca's favorite cafe and evidence bags from his security work, approaching the situation with the professional detachment that had made him successful in corporate investigations. He found Rebecca in the nursery, sitting among unopened boxes of crib parts and scattered paint samples for walls that might never be finished. The room felt like a monument to broken promises, filled with preparations for a future that was dissolving around her. "We're doing this right," Danny said, his voice gentler than his expression suggested. "Legal documentation, photographs with metadata, chain of custody procedures. If this goes to divorce court, we want everything to be bulletproof." Rebecca watched her brother photograph Marcus's hidden credit card statements with professional efficiency, noting the way he documented each piece of evidence with the thoroughness of someone who testified in court before. Danny had always been her protector, but seeing him work in full investigation mode made the situation feel suddenly, terrifyingly real. "Look at the dates," she said, pointing to restaurant charges that corresponded with nights she remembered clearly. "The affair started 3 months into my pregnancy, right when the morning sickness was at its worst, when I needed him most." The recognition pain hit her like a physical blow as she processed the timeline. All those nights when she'd been too exhausted to cook dinner, when she'd fallen asleep on the couch by 8 p.m., when she'd apologized for not being a better wife while her body worked overtime to grow their child. Marcus had been using her pregnancy symptoms as cover for his affair, her vulnerability as an opportunity for his betrayal. "I deserve better than this," she said aloud, needing to hear the validation in her own voice. "I know I did." Danny paused his photographing to look at her directly, his expression softening with the protective love that had defined their relationship since childhood. "You deserved a hell of a lot better than this, Becca. You deserved a husband who supported you through pregnancy, not one who used it as an excuse to cheat." He returned to examining Marcus's desk more thoroughly, using techniques Rebecca recognized from television crime shows, but had never seen applied to her own life. When he found the business card wedged behind a framed photograph of their wedding, his entire demeanor changed. "Becca, look at this." The card was simple white cardstock with black lettering, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. Discreet Solutions was printed in clean, professional font, with a phone number and address below. But it was the handwritten note on the back that made Rebecca's blood run cold. "V. Sterling referred you. The usual rate for pregnancy complications." Rebecca felt the baby kick hard inside her, as if responding to her sudden spike in heart rate and the flood of stress hormones coursing through her system. "Danny," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "what's the usual rate for pregnancy complications?" Her brother's expression went dark as he photographed the card from multiple angles, documenting it with the same care he'd given to everything else, but with an intensity that made Rebecca's chest tight with fear. "I don't know, Becca, but I'm going to find out." The implications of the business card hung between them like a toxic cloud. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about someone named V. Sterling referring Marcus to people who handled pregnancy complications for money. Rebecca didn't know what that meant exactly, but every instinct she possessed was screaming that it was dangerous. As Danny continued his methodical documentation of Marcus's hidden life, Rebecca sat in the ruins of the nursery and tried to process how completely her understanding of her marriage had shifted in the span of 12 hours. Yesterday, she'd thought she was dealing with a cheating husband in the end of her relationship. Today, she was beginning to suspect she was dealing with something much worse. Something that threatened not just her marriage, but her safety and the safety of her unborn child. Vanessa Sterling. The name on the business card felt familiar in Rebecca's mouth when she said it aloud, rolling the syllables around like she was trying to solve a puzzle. She sat in her mother's living room 3 hours later, surrounded by printouts and photographs Danny had made of all the evidence, trying to place where she'd heard that name before. The afternoon light streamed through Patricia's lace curtains, casting intricate shadows across the coffee table that was now covered with the detritus of a marriage's destruction. Credit card statements, photographs, phone records, and that damning business card with its cryptic message about pregnancy complications. Danny had left to make some calls to contacts in law enforcement and corporate security, promising to return with more information about Discreet Solutions and whoever V. Sterling might be. Patricia was at work, pulling a double shift at Riverside General Hospital, leaving Rebecca alone with her thoughts and her growing certainty that this situation was spiraling into something beyond a simple marital betrayal. Vanessa Sterling. The name nagged at her like a forgotten song lyric, something she should remember but couldn't quite grasp. Rebecca closed her eyes and tried to think of where she might have encountered someone with that name. Running through coworkers, neighbors, friends of friends, anyone who might have crossed paths with Marcus in a professional or social setting. And then the memory surfaced with crystal clarity, hitting her like cold water. Marcus's law firm had hired a new paralegal 6 months ago. Young, ambitious, beautiful in that polished way that came from good genes, expensive skincare, and the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to take whatever she wanted from life. Rebecca had met her at the company Christmas party in December, when she was 4 months pregnant and just starting to show. The memory came flooding back in vivid detail. The law firm's annual holiday celebration at the Riverside Country Club, all gleaming marble and crystal chandeliers, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. Rebecca had worn her only maternity dress that was formal enough for the occasion, a black number that made her feel like an awkward teenager playing dress-up among the sophisticated legal professionals. Vanessa Sterling had approached them near the bar, where Marcus was getting Rebecca a ginger ale for her morning sickness and something stronger for himself. She'd been stunning in the way that made other women instinctively check their own appearance, wearing a red dress that hugged her curves and cost more than Rebecca spent on clothes in 6 months. "You must be so excited about the baby," Vanessa had said, her hand lingering on Marcus's arm in a way that seemed casual but felt deliberate. "I just love children. There's something so magical about new life." But now Rebecca remembered the smile that hadn't reached Vanessa's eyes, the way her gaze had lingered on Marcus while she spoke to Rebecca. How she'd known details about Rebecca's pregnancy that Marcus shouldn't have shared with a casual work acquaintance. The way she'd positioned herself in every group photo that night, always next to Marcus, always perfectly placed to be in the center of attention. The memory flooding started then, rushing back like a tide Rebecca couldn't stop. Every company event where Vanessa had been just a little too interested in Rebecca's pregnancy symptoms, offering advice and sympathy with the smooth confidence of someone who'd researched the subject thoroughly. Every casual comment about how lucky Marcus was to have such an understanding wife who didn't mind him working late with demanding colleagues. "I should have seen it," Rebecca said aloud to the empty living room, her voice echoing in the space where she'd spent countless afternoons as a child. "I should have known something was wrong." Jennifer Walsh arrived 40 minutes later with reinforcements: chocolate ice cream, tissues, and the righteous fury that came from 15 years of friendship and zero tolerance for people who hurt the ones she loved. Jen taught 4th grade at Riverside Elementary and had the kind of moral clarity that came from working with children who saw the world in terms of right and wrong, without complicated gray areas. "Don't you dare blame yourself for this," Jen said, unpacking grocery bags with military efficiency while Rebecca recounted the morning's discoveries. "This is not your fault. This is Marcus being a cheating piece of garbage who took advantage of your trust." Jen moved through Patricia's kitchen like she owned it, putting ice cream in the freezer and making tea with the automatic competence of someone who'd been part of the family for over a decade. She'd been Rebecca's roommate in college, maid of honor at her wedding, and the first person Rebecca had called when she found out she was pregnant. "I never liked him," Jen announced, opening a container of chocolate chunk ice cream and handing Rebecca a spoon. "Too smooth, too perfect, like he practiced being charming in a mirror every morning. You could have mentioned that before I married him. You were happy, or at least you seemed happy, and I thought maybe I was wrong about him." Jen paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Turns out I wasn't wrong. I just wasn't wrong enough." Rebecca found herself laughing despite everything, the kind of slightly hysterical laughter that comes when stress reaches a breaking point and the only choice is to laugh or completely fall apart. Jen had always been able to do that, find humor in the darkest situations without minimizing the real pain involved. An hour later, Rebecca found herself in the bathtub, fully clothed, letting warm water soak through her maternity dress while she tried to process everything she'd learned. She locked the bathroom door, needing the only space in the house that felt completely safe and private. The water wasn't hot enough to harm the baby, just warm enough to provide some comfort she couldn't name or explain. She stayed there for 15 minutes, just breathing and existing in a space where no one expected anything from her except survival. The baby moved restlessly inside her, responding to her elevated stress levels, and she placed both hands on her belly and tried to send calming thoughts to the life growing within her. When she finally emerged, wrapped in one of her mother's thick terry cloth robes, Danny had returned with a file folder and an expression that made Rebecca's stomach clench with dread. "Vanessa Sterling, 28 years old, graduated from Georgetown Law School 2 years ago with honors," Danny said, spreading photographs and documents across the coffee table. "No major debts, ambitious career track, recently moved to an expensive downtown apartment that should be way outside her salary range as a junior paralegal." The photographs showed a woman Rebecca recognized but had never really seen clearly before. Vanessa leaving her apartment building in designer clothes that cost more than Rebecca's monthly grocery budget. Vanessa having lunch at restaurants where entrees started at $50. Vanessa shopping at stores that sold $1,000 handbags like they were everyday necessities. "She's not some naive victim who got swept up in an affair," Danny continued, his voice taking on the professional tone he used when briefing corporate clients. This woman knows exactly what she's doing, and she's been planning it for a while. Sonnery. Rebecca studied the photographs more carefully, noting details she'd missed during their brief encounters at company events. The confidence in Vanessa's posture, the way she moved through expensive spaces like she belonged there, the calculating intelligence behind her beautiful exterior. This wasn't a woman who'd stumbled into an affair. This was a woman who'd identified a target and systematically pursued him. "Look at the timeline," Danny said, pointing to credit card records he'd somehow obtained. Marcus started spending money on her 4 months ago, but the expensive purchases didn't begin until she moved to the new apartment 6 weeks ago. She's been escalating the relationship systematically. At 2 in the morning, Rebecca found herself Googling signs your husband is cheating, even though she already knew all the signs, even though she had photographic evidence and documented proof of Marcus's infidelity. But she needed the validation that came from reading other women's stories, the confirmation from strangers on the internet that she wasn't imagining things, that her instincts had been correct all along. The websites were full of testimonials from women who discovered affairs in similar ways. Late-night text messages, unexplained expenses, changes in behavior that their husbands dismissed as hormonal or paranoid. Reading their stories made Rebecca feel less alone, but it also made her realize how common this pattern was. How many women had been exactly where she was now? Her phone rang, interrupting her late-night research spiral. Danny's name appeared on the screen, and she answered immediately. "Becca, I got Marcus's phone records from my contact at the telecommunications company. You need to see this right now." "What time is it?" "Late, but this can't wait until morning." Danny arrived 20 minutes later with coffee and a stack of papers that made Rebecca's hands shake before she even looked at them. The phone records told a story she hadn't expected, one that made everything so much worse. The affair wasn't new. The first calls to Vanessa's number had started 8 months ago, before Rebecca was pregnant, before the pregnancy was even a possibility they'd discussed. The pattern of calls showed a relationship that had been building slowly and deliberately over months. "He never wanted the baby," Rebecca said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The pregnancy didn't complicate an existing affair. The affair was already established when I got pregnant. "Becca," Danny's voice was careful, controlled in the way that meant he was about to deliver news that would change everything. "There's something else. I ran a background check on Discreet Solutions. And they don't just handle affairs or reputation management. They specialize in making problems disappear. Permanently." Rebecca set her coffee cup down with hands that trembled, placing both palms on her belly and feeling the baby move restlessly inside her, as if the child could sense the danger they were both in. "This isn't just an affair," she whispered to herself, the words carrying the weight of terrible understanding. "This is something else entirely." The room fell silent except for the sound of her own breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the highway. Rebecca looked at her brother, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes, and understood that whatever she'd thought she was dealing with had just become something much more dangerous than a cheating husband. This was about someone who wanted her gone completely, and they were willing to pay professionals to make that happen. Discreet Solutions operated out of a nondescript office building in downtown Riverside, the kind of place where businesses rented space by the month and no one asked too many questions about what their tenants actually did for a living. Rebecca sat in Danny's black sedan outside the building at noon the next day, watching a steady stream of people come and go. Lawyers in expensive suits carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Consultants with the kind of bland, forgettable faces that suggested they specialized in solving problems people didn't want to think about too carefully. Private investigators who moved with the careful awareness of people accustomed to being watched and watching others in return. The building itself was unremarkable. Gray concrete and tinted glass, designed to blend into the urban landscape without drawing attention. But something about it made Rebecca's skin crawl, as if the very air around the place was tainted with secrets and things better left unexamined. "They specialize in reputation management," Danny read from his phone, scrolling through what little information existed online about Discreet Solutions. "Evidence disposal, witness relocation, corporate security consulting, personal protection services." What kind of reputation management requires evidence disposal? The kind that operates in legal gray areas, Danny replied, his voice grim. The kind that wealthy people use when they need problems solved quietly and permanently. Rebecca felt the baby kick harder than usual, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. She'd read somewhere that unborn babies could sense their mother's emotional state, that stress hormones crossed the placental barrier and affected the developing child. The thought that her fear was hurting her baby made everything exponentially worse. What kind of problem would I be, she asked, though she already knew the answer with the clarity that comes from facing an unthinkable truth. Danny's jaw tightened, and he was quiet for a long moment before answering. The kind that complicates divorce proceedings, claims half his assets, receives child support for 18 years. The kind that makes starting over with a younger woman legally and financially complicated. Patricia arrived with lunch from Rebecca's favorite deli, finding them still parked outside the Discrete Solutions building like they were conducting surveillance on enemy territory. She took one look at the business card Danny was holding, and her nurse training kicked in with automatic efficiency. "We're calling the police right now." "With what evidence?" Danny asked, his frustration evident. "A business card? Suspicious text messages that disappeared? We need more than suspicions before we involve law enforcement." "And more of what exactly?" "Proof of intent, documented threats, evidence of actual criminal activity, not just the possibility of it." Rebecca felt rage building in her chest, hot and unfamiliar and somehow clarifying. Not just anger at Marcus for his betrayal, but fury at her own naivete. How long had she been the stupid wife, the inconvenient obstacle standing between her husband and whatever life he really wanted? The rage felt different from any emotion she'd experienced before. It was maternal, protective, fierce in a way that surprised her with its intensity. Someone was threatening her child, and every instinct she possessed was responding to that threat with a determination that bordered on violence. "I'm not paranoid," she said, needing to hear the validation out loud. "Something is really wrong here, and I'm not imagining it." "No, honey," Patricia said, squeezing her hand. "You're not paranoid. Your instincts are trying to protect you and the baby." That night, alone in her mother's house while Patricia worked another shift at the hospital, Rebecca researched Discrete Solutions more thoroughly. The official website was professionally designed but deliberately vague, full of corporate speak about comprehensive problem-solving and discrete consultation services, without ever specifying what problems they actually solve. But buried in legal forms and divorce attorney discussion boards, she found references that made her blood run cold. Lawyers sharing warnings about opposing parties who'd hired Discrete Solutions. Divorce cases where pregnant wives had suddenly relocated out of state for mysterious health reasons. Accidents that seemed coincidental but had resulted in convenient miscarriages that simplified custody arrangements. Women who'd been committed to psychiatric facilities during contentious divorce proceedings, only to suffer tragic complications that ended their pregnancies and, in some cases, their lives. Always within the bounds of plausible deniability, always explainable as unfortunate coincidences or pre-existing medical conditions. Her hands shook as she read testimonials from attorneys who'd lost cases against clients represented by lawyers who'd used Discrete Solutions. The pattern was always the same. A problem person would become unstable, require medical intervention, and then suffer complications that eliminated them as obstacles to their spouse's desired outcome. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing Rebecca's growing terror, and she placed both hands on her belly and tried to send calming thoughts to the life growing inside her. But her own fear was too overwhelming to hide, and she could feel her stress affecting the baby's movements. Rebecca found herself sitting in her car outside Marcus's office building the next morning, unable to force herself to go inside and confront him with what she'd learned. She'd driven there with some vague idea of demanding answers. But now that she was here, the thought of facing him terrified her. She watched Vanessa leave the building for lunch, elegant and confident in a way that made Rebecca feel dowdy and awkward by comparison. Everything about the younger woman spoke of someone who'd never doubted her right to take whatever she wanted from life, who'd never had to compromise or settle or make do with less than perfection. Vanessa moved through the world with the fluid grace of someone who'd been beautiful her entire life, who understood instinctively how to use that beauty as a weapon. She was everything Rebecca felt she wasn't right now. Slim, sophisticated, unencumbered by the physical and emotional weight of carrying another human being. Rebecca's phone rang, startling her from her surveillance. Unknown number. Mrs. Collins? The voice was professional, calm, completely ordinary. The kind of tone used by customer service representatives and medical receptionists, people who dealt with problems as routine business matters. Yes? This is regarding the consultation your husband arranged. We should meet to discuss the situation. Rebecca's mouth went dry, her heart hammering against her ribs with such force she was sure the caller could hear it through the phone. What consultation? Tomorrow 2 p.m., Riverside Park near the playground area. Come alone and we can explain everything. I don't understand. Mrs. Collins, your husband is concerned about your stability during this pregnancy. We're here to help, but we need to discuss the options available. The line went dead before Rebecca could respond, leaving her sitting in her car with a phone that suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. She stared at the device for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Someone from Discreet Solutions wanted to meet with her about her stability during pregnancy. Her husband had arranged a consultation without her knowledge. They were talking about options and help in the same tone someone might use to discuss insurance policies or mortgage refinancing. Rebecca called the number back twice, but both attempts went straight to voicemail, with a generic recording that identified the number, but provided no information about who might be calling or what organization they represented. She sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, staring at her phone and trying to decide whether to call Danny immediately or try to handle this herself. Part of her was tired of being protected and managed, tired of being treated like she was too fragile to deal with her own life and problems. But as she drove home, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's meeting would change everything, that whatever happened at Riverside Park would determine not just the future of her marriage, but the future of her life and her child's life. The stakes had just gotten higher than she'd ever imagined possible. The voice had been so perfectly, terrifyingly ordinary, professional without being warm, calm without being reassuring, the kind of tone Rebecca associated with customer service representatives and medical receptionists, people who dealt with problems and complications as routine business matters that required efficient solutions. She called the number back 3 times before dinner, desperate for more information, some clue about who these people were or what they actually wanted from her. Each attempt went straight to voicemail with the same generic recording that identified the number as belonging to professional services without providing any additional details. Rebecca lay in bed that night feeling more alone than she'd ever felt in her life, despite the baby moving actively inside her in response to her elevated stress levels. Marcus was in Atlanta, allegedly handling a real estate development deal that required his personal attention. Danny was working late on another corporate investigation case. Her mother was pulling a double shift at the hospital, covering for a colleague whose own family emergency had left the maternity ward short-staffed. Just her and the baby, who seemed to sense her distress with increasingly vigorous movements that kept her awake and anxious until the early hours of the morning. Rebecca found herself talking to her unborn child, whispering reassurances she didn't entirely believe about how everything was going to be okay, how they were going to figure this out together. The next day arrived gray and cold, with the kind of October weather that promised winter wasn't far away. Rebecca drove to Riverside Park through streets that looked different somehow, as if seeing them through the lens of potential danger had changed their fundamental character. Every car might be following her. Every pedestrian might be watching her. She chose a parking spot that gave her clear sight lines to the playground area and multiple exit routes, positioning her car so she could leave quickly if the situation became threatening. Her backup plan involved Danny tracking her phone location through an app they'd installed the night before, but she needed to know what Discreet Solutions actually wanted from her. The playground was busy with the usual afternoon crowd of mothers and nannies supervising children who were too young for school. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that someone nearby was about to have a conversation that might determine whether she lived or died. At exactly 2 p.m., a man approached the bench where Rebecca sat. He was completely unremarkable in every way. Mid-30s, average height, forgettable face that seemed almost deliberately generic, professional demeanor, expensive but conservative clothes, the kind of person who could disappear into any crowd without being remembered. Mrs. Collins, thank you for coming. He sat beside her without invitation, close enough to seem friendly to any casual observer, but maintaining enough distance to avoid appearing threatening. His voice was the same one she'd heard on the phone, professionally pleasant in a way that made her skin crawl. "What do you want from me? Your husband is very concerned about your emotional stability during this pregnancy. Recent behavior patterns suggest you might be experiencing difficulties adjusting to the hormonal and psychological changes that can occur during the later stages of pregnancy." Rebecca kept her voice steady, despite the fear that was making her heart race. "What kind of difficulties?" "Paranoid ideation, irrational suspicions about your husband's fidelity, anxiety about imaginary threats to your safety. These are all common symptoms of pregnancy-induced psychological disorders." The irony was breathtaking. She was being told she was paranoid for suspecting her husband was cheating by a man her husband had hired to discuss her elimination. The gaslighting was so complete, it would have been almost funny if it wasn't terrifying. "Postpartum depression can actually begin during pregnancy," the man continued, his tone remaining conversational and educational. "In severe cases, women can become a danger to themselves and their unborn children. Tragic accidents happen when maternal instincts become compromised by hormonal imbalances." The baby kicked hard against Rebecca's ribs, as if protesting the implication that it was in danger from its own mother. Rebecca realized she'd been unconsciously holding her breath, the way she used to during childhood games of hide-and-seek when she hoped predators wouldn't find her hiding spot. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A comprehensive consultation with qualified professionals, medical evaluation by specialists who understand pregnancy-related psychological disorders, temporary relocation to a facility where you can receive appropriate treatment in a controlled environment." The sanitized language couldn't disguise what he was actually describing. Involuntary psychiatric commitment during pregnancy, away from family and legal representation, in a facility where anything could happen to her or her baby. "Very discreet, of course," he added. "Your husband wants what's best for everyone involved, including your unborn child. And if I'm not interested in voluntary consultation?" The man's smile never wavered, but something shifted in his eyes that made Rebecca's blood turn to ice water in her veins. "Mrs. Collins, I certainly hope it doesn't come to that. But there are legal mechanisms available for protecting unborn children from mothers whose mental state poses a risk to fetal development. Court-ordered interventions that, while less pleasant for everyone involved, are sometimes necessary." The threat was crystal clear. Submit to voluntary psychiatric commitment or face forced commitment through legal channels. Either way, she would lose control of her life, her pregnancy, and quite possibly both permanently. "I'll need some time to think about this." "Of course, but I wouldn't recommend taking too long to make a decision. These psychological conditions tend to deteriorate rapidly without proper intervention, and the safety of your child has to be the primary consideration." He stood to leave, then turned back with what appeared to be an afterthought but felt completely rehearsed. "Oh, and Mrs. Collins, it would be in everyone's best interest if you didn't discuss this conversation with family members or friends. People who care about you sometimes react emotionally to these situations, and we wouldn't want anyone to do something they might regret later." The threat to her family was delivered with the same professional courtesy as everything else, wrapped in concern for their well-being while making it clear that involving them would have consequences. Rebecca sat on the bench for 15 minutes after he left, watching other parents push their children on swings and marveling at how normal everything looked from the outside. Families enjoying an ordinary afternoon in the park, completely unaware that someone nearby had just been given an ultimatum that might cost her everything. She drove home with hands that shook so badly she had to pull over twice to regain her composure. The full scope of Marcus's betrayal was finally clear. He wasn't just having an affair, or even planning a divorce. He was planning to have her declared mentally incompetent and imprisoned in a psychiatric facility where she could be eliminated along with their child. By the time she reached her mother's driveway, Rebecca was hyperventilating with panic attacks that made it impossible to catch her breath. She made it into the house just as the complete breakdown hit, 7 months pregnant and more terrified than she'd ever been in her life. Rebecca made it to her mother's kitchen before the panic attack completely overwhelmed her. She collapsed into one of the familiar wooden chairs where she'd eaten countless childhood meals, gasping for air that seemed too thin to fill her lungs. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she tried to process what had just happened at the park. The threat had been delivered with such professional courtesy that she'd almost missed how comprehensive it was. Voluntary psychiatric commitment or forced legal intervention, temporary treatment that could become permanent, family members who might regret getting involved, every angle covered, every escape route blocked. 7 months pregnant, she was being systematically cornered by people who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. The realization crashed over her in waves. Her husband didn't just want a divorce, he wanted her eliminated entirely. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Danny's name on the screen was like a lifeline. "Where are you?" His voice was sharp with concern. "I've been tracking your location, and you've been sitting in the driveway for 10 minutes. Danny, they threatened me. They threatened the baby. They want to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. I'm already in my car. Don't go anywhere. Don't call anyone else. And don't make any decisions until I get there." Rebecca tried to explain what had happened, but the words came out in fragments between gasps for air. Professional consultation, pregnancy-related psychological disorders, legal mechanisms for protecting unborn children. Each phrase was a hammer blow against her sense of safety and sanity. Danny arrived within 8 minutes, his face grim and his movements urgent in a way that told Rebecca this was even worse than she'd understood. He found her still sitting at the kitchen table, tears streaming down her face as she tried to make sense of the conversation that had just upended her entire world. "Tell me everything," he said, sitting across from her and pulling out a digital recorder. "Every word you can remember, every detail about the man who approached you, everything." Rebecca recounted the conversation as precisely as she could, watching Danny's expression grow darker with each detail. When she finished describing the threats against family members who might interfere, his jaw was so tight she could see the muscles twitching beneath his skin. "Becca," he said slowly, setting down the recorder and looking directly into her eyes, "I need to tell you something that's going to sound impossible, but I need you to trust me completely." "What?" "I've been working this case for 3 weeks, since before you found the text messages, since before you knew anything was wrong." Rebecca stared at her brother, trying to process words that didn't make any sense. "What case?" "Marcus hired Discreet Solutions to handle what he called his pregnancy problem, but he didn't hire them directly. Vanessa Sterling made the initial contact. She's been coordinating everything from the beginning." "How do you know that?" Danny was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a revelation that would change everything Rebecca thought she understood about the last few weeks. "Because Discreet Solutions is my company." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Rebecca felt her understanding of reality shift completely, as if someone had rotated the entire world 90 degrees and expected her to find her balance on a surface that no longer made sense. "What?" "I run Discreet Solutions. It's a front operation for my investigation business. Corporate clients hire me to test their employees' loyalty, their security protocols, their vulnerability to various kinds of compromise. When someone calls my company wanting to hurt a pregnant woman, especially when that pregnant woman turns out to be my sister, I take the case very personally." Rebecca stood up abruptly and walked into the garden, despite the cold October air that made her breath visible in small puffs. She needed space and air and time to process what Danny had just told her. That the threatening consultation at the park had been theater, that her brother had been protecting her without her knowledge, that the danger was real, but the enemy wasn't quite what she'd thought. Patricia followed her outside with a cup of tea, and they sat together on the old porch swing without speaking. The silence was exactly what Rebecca needed. Space to understand that she wasn't as alone as she'd felt, that the conspiracy against her was real, but so was the protection surrounding her. "Every conversation has been recorded," Danny explained when she came back inside 20 minutes later. "Every meeting documented with video and audio from multiple angles. Every threat captured with the kind of quality that will hold up in court." He opened his laptop and showed her surveillance footage she hadn't known existed. Her meeting with the Discreet Solutions representative, filmed from at least 3 different angles with audio so clear she could hear every subtle threat in perfect detail. "I wasn't going crazy," Rebecca said, the validation flooding through her like physical relief. "People really were plotting against me." "You weren't crazy. You were in real danger from people who've done this before to other women in similar situations. Danny pulled up more files on his computer, revealing the scope of his investigation. Recorded phone conversations between Marcus and Vanessa that made Rebecca's stomach turn. Financial records showing payments to various consultants and specialists. Text messages detailing their plan with the clinical precision of people who'd researched every legal and medical angle. "But Becca, there's more," Danny said, his voice carrying a warning that made her brace for another devastating revelation. "The plan isn't just psychiatric commitment. They've been coordinating with people at the facility who specialize in pregnancy complications. They want to cause a miscarriage and make it look like a medical accident during treatment." Rebecca placed both hands on her belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her, as if sensing the conversation about its potential elimination. The protective fury that had been building for days crystallized into something harder and more focused than she'd ever experienced. "They want to kill my baby. They want to eliminate every obstacle to Marcus starting over with Vanessa. The pregnancy, the marriage, the financial obligations, your inheritance from your grandfather. All of it. Clean slate, no complications, no witnesses to testify about what really happened." The rage Rebecca felt was unlike anything she'd experienced before. Not just anger at betrayal, but the kind of protective ferocity that came from deep maternal instincts. Someone was threatening her child, and every fiber of her being was responding to that threat with a determination that surprised her with its intensity. "What do we do now?" Danny's smile was sharp and predatory in a way that reminded Rebecca why corporate executives paid him substantial amounts of money to protect their interests. "Now we let them think their plan is working while we build a case that will put them away for the rest of their lives." Danny's surveillance equipment covered every surface of Patricia's dining room table, transforming the space where Rebecca had eaten countless family dinners into something that looked like the command center for a military operation. Cameras, recording devices, transcripts printed on official letterhead, financial documents, and photographs. The complete documentation of a conspiracy to commit murder. "Marcus and Vanessa have been planning this for 2 months, Danny explained, opening file folders with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years building legal cases. "Since your pregnancy hit the second trimester and became obviously viable." The timeline he'd constructed was devastating in its thoroughness. Phone calls between Marcus and Vanessa that began as a fair coordination, but quickly evolved into something much darker. Financial transfers that showed Marcus liquidating assets in preparation for eliminating Rebecca's legal claims. Research into psychiatric facilities that specialized in pregnancy complications, with high rates of convenient medical emergencies. Rebecca listened to her husband's voice through laptop speakers, discussing her elimination with the same professional tone he used for real estate development deals. Clinical, emotionless, completely devoid of any recognition that he was talking about ending the life of his wife and child. "The pregnancy wasn't part of our original timeline," Marcus's recorded voice said, with the kind of irritation someone might use to discuss a scheduling conflict. "We need to handle this situation before it complicates the legal aspects of the divorce. Psychiatric commitment is the cleanest approach," Vanessa's voice replied with equal detachment. "Temporary at first, then permanent after the pregnancy complication. Grief-induced mental breakdown would be very sympathetic to a jury if anyone ever questioned the sequence of events. The baby Rebecca was carrying was never referred to as a child or as Marcus's son or daughter. Always the complication or the obstacle or the pregnancy situation. Never as a human being with the right to live." Rebecca felt something harder than anger crystallizing in her chest as she listened to recordings of her own husband discussing her murder. Not just protective fury, but strategic thinking. The maternal instinct that had been developing alongside her pregnancy was becoming something more focused and dangerous. "What are our legal options?" she asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. Danny spread documents across the table with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. "We have enough evidence for attempted murder charges, criminal conspiracy, insurance fraud, financial crimes, domestic violence. But we can approach this 2 different ways." Patricia arrived home from her hospital shift to find them surrounded by evidence, and she poured coffee with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen enough medical emergencies to know that panic never improved outcomes. What's the difference between the approaches? Option 1. We call law enforcement immediately. Arrests happen within hours. Rebecca is safe, but Marcus and Vanessa will probably negotiate plea deals that result in reduced sentences. Option 2. We let them believe their plan is proceeding as scheduled. Allow them to incriminate themselves further while building an absolutely airtight case that guarantees maximum sentences for everyone involved. Rebecca considered both options while feeling the baby move restlessly inside her. 7 months pregnant, every rational instinct told her to choose immediate safety and protection. But she was tired of being underestimated, tired of being seen as a weak victim who needed constant rescue from stronger people. Option 2, she said firmly, but I want to be involved in every decision from now on. No more protecting me by keeping me in the dark. That night, while Patricia worked another double shift covering for the maternity ward, Rebecca found herself organizing the baby's clothes for the 4th time in as many days. Folding and refolding tiny outfits by size and season, arranging them in the dresser drawer with obsessive precision. The repetitive motion helped calm her racing thoughts and gave her time to process the full scope of Marcus and Vanessa's betrayal. This wasn't a crime of passion or a relationship that had gotten out of hand. This was cold, calculated murder planned with the kind of attention to detail that suggested they'd researched similar cases. Patricia returned home at midnight with news that added another disturbing layer to the conspiracy they were uncovering. I had an interesting conversation with Grace Collins at the grocery store yesterday, Patricia said, referring to Marcus's mother. She made several comments about how worried the family is about your mental stability during pregnancy. What kind of comments? How pregnancy hormones can cause irrational behavior. How concerned Marcus is about your paranoid thoughts. How important it is for the family to support you through this difficult time, even if that means making hard decisions about your care. She's been laying groundwork, Rebecca realized, for months apparently, making sure people in the community hear concerns about your psychological state before any official actions are taken. The scope of the conspiracy was larger than Rebecca had imagined. This wasn't just Marcus and Vanessa improvising a solution to an inconvenient pregnancy. This was a coordinated campaign involving multiple family members, designed to create a narrative that would make her elimination seem reasonable and necessary. Danny's phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Marcus, calling from his hotel room in Atlanta, where he was supposedly handling urgent business matters. Danny answered in character as the discreet solutions consultant who'd been coordinating Rebecca's psychiatric commitment. Everything is proceeding according to schedule, Danny said in the professionally calm voice Rebecca now recognized. Mrs. Collins is cooperating with the evaluation process. How is she responding to the medication? Marcus asked. Rebecca felt her blood freeze. What medication? The mild sedatives are helping with her anxiety and paranoid ideation, Danny replied smoothly. She's becoming more compliant and less likely to resist the treatment recommendations. Excellent. The sooner we can resolve this situation, the better for everyone involved. The psychiatric facility is prepared to receive her tomorrow evening. Once she's admitted, we can begin the more intensive treatment protocols. And the pregnancy complication will occur naturally as a result of the stress and medication interaction. These things happen frequently during psychiatric treatment. Very unfortunate, but not uncommon with patients in her condition. Rebecca listened to her husband discuss the planned murder of their child like he was ordering dinner, his voice carrying no more emotion than if he'd been discussing weather conditions or stock market fluctuations. When the call ended, Rebecca realized that the last emotional connection to her marriage had died completely. Whatever love she'd felt for Marcus, whatever hope she'd harbored for their relationship, had been incinerated by hearing him coordinate her elimination with professional efficiency. Tomorrow night, Danny said, looking at the notes he'd taken during the call, that's when they expect you to be committed to the psychiatric facility. What happens tomorrow night? We spring the trap that puts them away forever. The plan Danny outlined was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its completeness. Rebecca would appear to cooperate with the psychiatric evaluation that Marcus and Vanessa had arranged, allowing them to believe their conspiracy was succeeding while documenting every aspect of their criminal intent with courtroom-quality evidence. The beauty of this approach, Danny explained as they rehearsed Rebecca's performance, is that they'll incriminate themselves completely while thinking they're about to eliminate the only witness to their crimes. Rebecca practiced her role in front of Patricia's bedroom mirror, learning to project vulnerability without seeming theatrical, confusion without appearing obviously deceptive. The goal was to seem like a pregnant woman whose mental state was deteriorating under the stress of imaginary paranoid thoughts. "I worry about my ability to handle motherhood," she rehearsed, the words tasting like poison in her mouth. "Sometimes I feel disconnected from reality, like people are plotting against me." Each lie was carefully crafted to support Marcus's narrative, while staying just short of claims that could be medically disproven. Emotional instability that could be attributed to pregnancy hormones. Anxiety that could be explained by first-time mother fears. Paranoid thoughts that happened to be completely accurate. The psychiatric consultation was scheduled to take place at a medical office Danny had rented specifically for this operation. Dr. Frederick Walsh, the consulting psychiatrist, was actually Danny's business partner in the investigation firm. But his credentials as a licensed mental health professional were completely legitimate. Marcus attended the session via video call from his hotel room in Atlanta, his face pixelated by a poor internet connection, but his voice coming through with crystal clarity. Vanessa sat beside Rebecca in the consultation room, playing the role of concerned friend with Oscar-worthy conviction. "I've been so worried about Rebecca," Vanessa said, reaching over to squeeze Rebecca's hand with apparent sympathy. "She's been saying things that don't make sense, having paranoid thoughts about people plotting against her and her baby." The irony was so complete it took all of Rebecca's self-control not to laugh out loud. She was being called paranoid for suspecting a conspiracy by one of the people actively conspiring against her, while surrounded by recording equipment that was documenting the conspiracy in real time. Dr. Walsh conducted a thorough professional evaluation, asking standard questions about Rebecca's mood, sleep patterns, anxiety levels, and relationship with reality. Rebecca answered with carefully modulated honesty, letting her genuine stress show through while avoiding any statements that would contradict the narrative Marcus and Vanessa needed to hear. "I feel overwhelmed sometimes," Rebecca admitted, allowing real emotion to color her voice. "Like there are threats everywhere, but I can't identify what they are or where they're coming from." "Have you been having thoughts about harming yourself or your baby?" Dr. Walsh asked, following the standard protocol for evaluating pregnant women with psychological concerns. "Not exactly harming," Rebecca said carefully, "but sometimes I wonder if the baby would be safer if I wasn't responsible for protecting it. Like maybe other people could take better care of it than I could." After the formal evaluation, Vanessa and Dr. Walsh discussed treatment options while Rebecca waited in an adjacent room. The conversation was recorded through equipment Danny had installed throughout the medical suite, capturing every word with courtroom-quality audio. "How quickly can we proceed with involuntary commitment?" Vanessa asked, her voice taking on a business-like efficiency that was chilling in its casualness. Given her paranoid ideation and pregnancy-related anxiety, combined with her statements about feeling unable to protect her child, "We could justify immediate intervention," Dr. Walsh replied in character. "She's clearly presenting as a potential danger to herself and her unborn child. The husband needs this handled quickly before her condition deteriorates further and she becomes more difficult to manage." "I understand completely. These pregnancy-related psychological conditions can escalate very rapidly without proper pharmaceutical intervention." Suriri, sitting in the adjacent room and listening through Danny's earpiece, Rebecca felt her final illusions about her marriage dissolve completely. But beneath the grief and betrayal, she felt something stronger and more focused growing. A determination that surprised her with its clarity and intensity. That evening, Danny revealed the complete financial scope of Marcus and Vanessa's conspiracy, bank records showing systematic asset liquidation over the past 4 months. Rebecca's inheritance from her grandfather transferred to offshore accounts linked to shell companies Vanessa had established. Their joint savings, their emergency fund, even equity borrowed against the house, all moved to financial instruments that Rebecca couldn't access or trace. "They've stolen almost $200,000, Danny said, showing her documentation that made her stomach turn. "Everything you brought to the marriage, everything you earned during the marriage, everything you inherited independently. all of it transferred to accounts that will disappear as soon as you are declared mentally incompetent. Rebecca stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror that night, noting how pregnancy had changed not just her body, but her entire face. Her eyes looked different, harder, more focused, less trusting. The naive woman who discovered her husband's affair just days earlier was gone completely. In her place was someone Rebecca was still learning to recognize. Someone who understood that survival sometimes required strategic thinking and careful deception. Someone who could smile at people who wanted her dead while planning their destruction with methodical precision. Marcus called at midnight, his voice carrying the artificial warmth of someone who believed he was speaking to a woman who would be dead within 24 hours. "Honey, I'm flying home early tomorrow. Dr. Walsh called me about your evaluation, and I think we need to move quickly on getting you the help you need." "What kind of help?" Rebecca asked, injecting just the right amount of confusion and gratitude into her voice. "There's a very exclusive facility that specializes in pregnancy-related mental health issues. Pinehurst Women's Treatment Center. They have an opening tomorrow evening, and Dr. Walsh thinks immediate admission would be beneficial." Tomorrow seems so sudden. These psychological conditions can deteriorate very rapidly without proper medical intervention, especially during pregnancy. Dr. Walsh is concerned that waiting could put both you and the baby at risk. Rebecca played her part perfectly, sounding grateful for Marcus's concern, while inside her chest something cold and calculating was making final preparations for war. "If you think it's what's best for us." "I do, sweetheart. We'll discuss all the details when I get home tomorrow afternoon." After hanging up, Rebecca sat in the dark kitchen, feeling the baby move quietly inside her. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, the end of her marriage, and the beginning of whatever came next. For the first time in weeks, she felt completely ready for what was coming. Marcus returned from Atlanta the next afternoon, carrying white roses and wearing the expression of a man who believed he was hours away from eliminating his most significant problem. He'd always been skilled at reading people and situations, at projecting exactly the emotion that would achieve his desired outcome. And now he was performing the role of concerned husband with the same professional competence he brought to multi-million-dollar real estate negotiations. "I've been thinking about us during the entire flight home," Marcus said, arranging the flowers in Rebecca's favorite crystal vase with careful precision. "About what's best for our family and our future together?" Rebecca accepted his embrace, noting how foreign his touch felt after only a few days of separation. 7 months pregnant, her body had changed so much that they no longer fit together naturally. But there was something else different too. She could feel the deception radiating from him, like heat from a fever. "Dr. Walsh called me with his evaluation results," Marcus continued, settling onto the living room couch and pulling Rebecca down beside him. "He's quite concerned about your emotional state and the paranoid ideation you've been experiencing." The irony of being called paranoid for accurately identifying a conspiracy was no longer surprising. Rebecca had moved beyond shock into a kind of calm, analytical state that allowed her to observe Marcus's performance with professional detachment. "I know I haven't been myself lately," she said, playing her assigned role. "The pregnancy has been harder than I expected emotionally." "That's completely understandable, sweetheart. Pregnancy can cause all kinds of psychological changes that are completely beyond your control. The important thing is getting you proper professional help before the situation gets worse." Vanessa Sterling arrived exactly 45 minutes later, as if her timing had been coordinated in advance. She brought chamomile tea and homemade cookies, settling into Rebecca's living room like she'd been invited to participate in a family crisis rather than orchestrate a murder. "I've done extensive research into treatment facilities," Vanessa announced, opening a leather portfolio with the efficiency of someone presenting a business proposal. "Pinehurst Women's Treatment Center has an excellent reputation for handling pregnancy-related psychological disorders." Rebecca watched her husband and his mistress coordinate her elimination with the smooth teamwork of people who'd rehearsed this conversation multiple times. They had anticipated her questions, prepared responses to her objections, and planned solutions to any resistance she might offer. "What exactly would the treatment involve?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about how they intended to kill her while maintaining plausible deniability. "Initially, a comprehensive psychological evaluation to determine the exact nature and severity of your condition, Marcus explained, consulting notes he'd written on legal pad paper. Then a customized treatment program involving therapy, medication, and careful monitoring of your pregnancy. The facility has excellent prenatal care, Vanessa added with the kind of detailed knowledge that suggested extensive research. Everything would be monitored very carefully to ensure the safety of both you and the baby. What happens after the baby is born? We'll reassess your psychological condition at that point, Marcus said with the patience of someone explaining something to a child. See what kind of ongoing support and treatment you might need for a full recovery. The plan was transparent once you understood the real agenda. Psychiatric commitment during pregnancy, medical complications that would cause miscarriage, permanent institutionalization justified by grief-induced mental breakdown. Clean, efficient, and completely legal as long as no one could prove deliberate intent. That evening, while Rebecca supposedly prepared for admission to Pinehurst Women's Treatment Center, Marcus and Vanessa celebrated their impending success at the house. They had no idea that Danny's surveillance equipment covered every room, or that Rebecca was watching their celebration from a van parked across the street. This time tomorrow, the pregnancy problem will be resolved, Vanessa said, raising a glass of champagne that cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. And the insurance settlement will cover any medical complications that occurred during psychiatric treatment, Marcus replied, toasting their success with obvious satisfaction. Tragic accidents happen all the time in institutional settings. How long before we can proceed with the divorce? 6 months minimum to avoid suspicion, but probably a full year to be completely safe. Grieving widower needs time to heal before he can consider new relationships. They discussed Rebecca's murder like a business merger, complete with timelines and risk assessments and contingency plans for various complications. Marcus made jokes about Rebecca's trusting nature. Vanessa laughed about how easy it had been to manipulate a pregnant woman whose maternal instincts made her vulnerable to concerns about her baby's well-being. Rebecca listened from the surveillance van, each word strengthening her resolve and eliminating any remaining emotional attachment to the man she'd married. They saw her as weak, gullible, and disposable. They were about to discover how completely they'd misunderstood the situation. At exactly midnight, she called Marcus from her mother's house. "I've been thinking about everything we discussed today," she said, injecting uncertainty into her voice. "I'm not sure I'm ready for the treatment facility. Maybe we should talk more first." "Rebecca, we've been through this," Marcus replied, and she could hear irritation bleeding through his false patience. "Dr. Walsh was very clear that delaying treatment could be dangerous for both you and the baby." "I know, but this feels so sudden, so final." "Sweetheart, it's not final. It's just getting you the professional help you need so we can start building our life together as a family. I want to see you before I go, both of you. I want to understand exactly what's going to happen and why it's necessary." The silence on the other end of the line told Rebecca that Marcus was calculating, trying to determine how much she knew and whether meeting with both him and Vanessa represented an unacceptable risk. "Rebecca, I'm coming over right now," she interrupted. "We're going to have a conversation about my mental health and my future. All three of us together." She hung up before he could respond, then turned to Danny and Patricia, who'd been listening from the front seats of the surveillance van. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Danny asked. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." It was time to end this. Rebecca arrived at her own house at 12:30 a.m. like an avenging angel, 7 months pregnant and flanked by her brother and mother. Danny carried a briefcase containing months of surveillance evidence. Patricia carried a thermos of coffee and the calm authority of someone who'd supervised enough medical emergencies to know that thorough preparation and careful documentation determined the outcome of critical situations. The house looked different in the darkness, as if the crimes planned within its walls had changed its fundamental character. Lights were still on in the living room, where Marcus and Vanessa had been celebrating, their expensive champagne and casual discussion of murder, interrupted by the arrival of the woman they'd been planning to eliminate. Rebecca used her key to enter through the front door, her footsteps echoing in the foyer, with a sound that seemed to announce the end of one phase of her life and the beginning of something entirely different. Marcus and Vanessa were exactly where the surveillance had shown them, sitting on the leather couch Rebecca had chosen when they'd first bought the house. wine glasses half empty on the coffee table. Celebration paused in the middle of toasts to their successful conspiracy. "Rebecca!" Marcus stood up quickly, his real estate developer's smile slipping automatically into place. "What are you doing here? I thought you were staying at your mother's house tonight." Vanessa remained seated, but Rebecca could see her calculating behind her beautiful exterior, trying to assess how much Rebecca knew and what threat she might represent to their carefully constructed plan. "I'm here to discuss my mental health, Marcus," Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear in a way that made both of them shift uncomfortably. "Specifically how you and Vanessa have been planning to destroy it." She opened Danny's briefcase and pulled out a portable speaker, the same professional equipment she used for marketing presentations at work. "High-quality audio reproduction for high-quality evidence. I've been having some very interesting conversations lately," Rebecca continued, connecting her phone to the speaker with movements that were deliberate and theatrical. "I thought you might want to hear what people have been saying about me." She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the living room with crystal clarity, emerging from professional-grade surveillance equipment. "The pregnancy wasn't part of our original timeline. We need to handle this situation before it complicates the legal aspects of the divorce." The color drained from both their faces as they listened to their own voices discussing Rebecca's elimination with the clinical detachment of people planning a business transaction. Vanessa's response followed immediately. "Psychiatric commitment is the cleanest approach. Temporary at first, then permanent after the pregnancy complication. Grief-induced mental breakdown would be very sympathetic to a jury if anyone ever questioned the sequence of events." "That's not... We never said..." Marcus started, but Rebecca cut him off with the next recording. Their conversation from 3 hours earlier, captured through equipment Danny had placed throughout the house. "This time tomorrow, the pregnancy problem will be resolved. The insurance settlement will cover any medical complications during psychiatric treatment. Tragic accidents happen all the time in institutional settings." Each recording was more damning than the previous one. Every plan, every threat, every casual discussion of her death and the death of their unborn child, captured in their own voices with courtroom-quality audio that eliminated any possibility of denial or explanation. "The police are already on their way," Danny announced, checking his watch with professional precision. "They should arrive within the next 10 minutes with warrants for both of your arrests." Rebecca sat heavily in her favorite armchair, the blue fabric chair that Marcus had always complained didn't match the rest of their carefully coordinated furniture. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby move restlessly inside her, as if sensing the tension and finality of the moment. "You stole my inheritance," she said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone stating documented facts. "You planned to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. You coordinated with people there to cause a miscarriage that would look like a medical accident. You wanted to kill our baby and make it appear to be the result of pregnancy complications during treatment for mental illness." "Rebecca, you're not thinking clearly," Marcus tried, falling back on the gaslighting that had worked so effectively during their marriage. "Stop." The word came out with enough force to shut him up completely. "I know exactly what I'm thinking. I have recordings of every conversation, documentation of every financial transfer, evidence of every aspect of your conspiracy. I know exactly what you plan to do to me and to our child." Vanessa, realizing her situation was completely hopeless, made a strategic decision that surprised everyone in the room. "He promised me everything," she said, looking directly at Rebecca with what might have been genuine emotion. "Marriage, financial security, a life together after you were gone. But he's been planning to dispose of me too, once your inheritance was secure and the divorce proceedings were finalized." She pulled out her phone and showed Rebecca text messages that made her stomach turn. Conversations between Marcus and another woman, someone younger than Vanessa, another paralegal at his law firm named Jennifer Chen. "He told me I was special, that we'd build a life together," Vanessa continued, her voice breaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. "But he's been setting up his next affair since last month. Text messages to Jennifer Chen about how beautiful and understanding she is, how different she is from his crazy pregnant wife and his clingy mistress." The additional evidence was devastating in its completeness. Marcus hadn't just planned to eliminate Rebecca. He'd been preparing to eliminate Vanessa as well, moving on to his next victim with the same cold calculation he'd used to destroy his marriage. "You were never going to marry me," Vanessa said, looking at Marcus with an expression that mixed hurt and fury. "I was just another problem to be eliminated once I'd served my purpose. I'm one." The sound of car doors slamming outside announced the arrival of law enforcement. Through the front windows, Rebecca could see police officers approaching the house with the purposeful movements of people executing planned arrests. "Marcus Collins, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, domestic violence, and embezzlement," Detective Sarah Martinez announced as she entered the living room with handcuffs and a warrant. Marcus was arrested with the professional efficiency of people who'd reviewed extensive evidence before making their move. His assets were frozen pending investigation. The house was secured as a crime scene. Vanessa was taken into custody as a co-conspirator, though her cooperation with providing additional evidence would be considered during plea negotiations. Rebecca watched her husband's arrest with a calm satisfaction that surprised her. Not revenge or hatred, but simple relief. Justice being served with the methodical precision of a legal system that worked correctly when provided with sufficient evidence. "The baby deserves better than this," she told Danny, as Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled and his carefully styled hair disheveled. "You both do, Becca. You both deserve so much better." 3 months later, Rebecca gave birth to a healthy daughter at Riverside General Hospital, the same medical facility where her mother worked and where she'd received prenatal care throughout her pregnancy. She named the baby Hope for the future that had almost been stolen from them and for the new life they were beginning together. The labor was long but uncomplicated, with Patricia coaching her through contractions while Danny paced the waiting room like an expectant father. When Hope finally arrived at 6 pounds, 8 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that announced her presence to the entire maternity ward, Rebecca felt a completeness she'd never experienced before. "She's perfect," Patricia whispered, tears streaming down her face as she held her granddaughter for the first time. "Absolutely perfect." The house sold quickly to a young couple expecting their first child, people who saw the beautiful colonial in the finished nursery as the foundation for the family life Rebecca had once hoped to build there. She used the proceeds to buy a smaller place closer to her mother, a cozy craftsman bungalow with built-in bookcases and a garden where Hope could learn to walk among flowers and vegetables. Marcus pleaded guilty from county jail 6 months after Hope's birth, accepting a 25-year sentence in exchange for avoiding a trial that would have exposed even more devastating details about his conspiracy. His mother, Grace Collins, made one attempt to visit Rebecca and claim grandparent visitation rights, but retreated permanently when presented with recordings of her participation in laying groundwork for Rebecca's psychiatric commitment. Vanessa Sterling testified at Marcus's sentencing hearing, having accepted a plea deal that resulted in 5 years probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation in the investigation. She'd also provided evidence about other clients of Discreet Solutions who'd used similar methods to eliminate inconvenient family members, leading to additional prosecutions and convictions. The divorce was finalized 8 months after Hope's birth, with Rebecca receiving full custody and Marcus renouncing all parental rights from prison. She kept her maiden name and gave it to her daughter, deciding that Thompson women were survivors who didn't need anyone else's name to define their worth. Jennifer Chen, the paralegal who'd been Marcus's intended next victim, sent Rebecca a handwritten thank you note after learning how close she'd come to being manipulated into a similar situation. She'd left the law firm and moved across the country, but wanted Rebecca to know that her courage in exposing the conspiracy had probably saved her life. On Hope's first birthday, Rebecca sat in their new house's garden, watching her daughter explore grass and flowers with the fearless curiosity of someone who'd never learned to be afraid of the world. The late afternoon sun cast everything in golden light, and for the first time in over a year, Rebecca felt completely at peace. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Walsh. "How are my favorite girls celebrating?" Rebecca looked at the message, typed back, "Perfect day with my perfect daughter," and set the phone aside to give Hope her complete attention. "I was never crazy," she told Hope during a quiet moment when the baby had settled into her lap to watch butterflies dance among the flower beds. "I was just married to someone who wanted me to think I was, but we're safe now and we're exactly where we belong." Hope babbled back in the nonsensical language of 1-year-olds, reaching for a monarch butterfly that hovered just out of reach. Rebecca smiled and pulled her daughter closer, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and sunshine and the kind of contentment that comes from surviving something that was meant to destroy you. The butterfly could wait. Some things were more important than what you couldn't catch. Some things, like the weight of your child in your arms and the knowledge that you'd protected her from people who wanted to harm her, were perfect exactly as they were. Rebecca Thompson was 33 years old, a single mother, and completely free for the first time in her adult life. She had a daughter who would grow up knowing that her mother had been brave enough to fight for both their lives when it mattered most. That felt like the best possible ending to the worst chapter of her life, and the perfect beginning for whatever came next. Years later, when Hope was old enough to ask questions about her father, Rebecca would tell her the truth, that some people are not capable of love, but that doesn't mean love doesn't exist. That her father had made choices that hurt people, but those choices didn't define Hope's worth or potential. That the strongest women aren't born that way. They're forged by fires they never saw coming, and they use that strength to protect the people they love most. And that sometimes the most important victory isn't winning a fight, but recognizing when you're in one and deciding that you're worth fighting for. Rebecca had learned all of these lessons while 7 months pregnant and fighting for her life and her daughter's life. Now she had the rest of their lives together to teach Hope that she was worth fighting for too. The pregnancy threat had been real and the danger had been overwhelming. But in the end, love and family and careful preparation had been stronger than conspiracy and hatred and greed. Some stories end with the truth winning and the family staying safe. This was one of those stories. Rebecca's story reminds us that sometimes the people closest to us can be the most dangerous. But it also shows us that with courage, family support, and careful planning, even the most overwhelming threats can be overcome. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button to help others discover Rebecca's incredible journey. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to trust your instincts when everyone told you that you were being paranoid? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Until next time, trust your instincts. They might just save your life. Thank you for listening.